Good morning. How is everybody this morning? Oh, those lights are really bright. Wow. I saw the title. I don't know that this is an inside view, so I probably will disappoint you. I will explain a little bit about the role. I've been in this role. I'm sorry, let me start again. My name is Bret Arsenault. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for a small software company in the Northwest called Microsoft. I have been in this role for 10 years. I've been at the company for a lot longer than that. And I was doing different security roles before that as well. So I was asked that I would sort of share the evolution of the CISO role, what it looks like, and how it's sort of gone from a backroom to a boardroom position. And then just some of the learnings on our own journey of what we've done around our security strategy inside the company. It doesn't mean it's the right strategy for you. It doesn't mean it's the best in the world. It's just a strategy. But maybe there's some things that you can glean from it and some of the insights that we've had while we've gone through the process, if that makes sense. I would much rather you ask questions than me do slides. But I do have slides. I'll give you an idea of what the agenda is, and then I'm going to stop. And then I'm going to ask if there are any questions, and then I will help that. I will also have prizes for questions. It's really simple. You ask a question, and then you get a prize if I think it's one of the best questions. And the rules are really simple. My ability to answer the question is largely influenced, so don't ask really hard questions. And so we'll do really well if we go down that path. So the idea in the conversation really was to talk about, in this scenario, what the role of the CISO is, how to simplify security. Probably the biggest obvious learning for me is making security something that everybody understands. And then leading with vision. It turns out, it seems like it's just words, but I'll share some examples that fundamentally changed how we led with vision and how the impact of that was for both the development of the products we do, the services we deliver internally, and the user experience, which I think is pretty interesting, which is that next point, which is putting people first. And so this idea that there's always this tension or trade-off you have to make between security and productivity is just false. And you can actually do both if you do it correctly. And there are times when it's a little bit more difficult. I like to think of security similar to the airbags of the industry. It should be omnipresent, always protecting you, but not in the way. And so how do you actually make those things happen as much as possible? And then obviously advancing and improving, which is we're never in a perfect state. The beautiful thing about this role is it's always changing. Every day there's a different type of attack. Every day there's a different opportunity for us to go do something differently. So our ability to continually adapt and take risks. It's not a zero-risk role. There are risks. And so what risks do you take and how do you apply and use those risks? Does that make sense? Kind of straightforward. OK, who has the first question? Go ahead. Is there a certain security framework that Microsoft follows internally? First, yeah. Nailed it. Oh. You can play for the Seahawks. So, sorry. That wasn't very nice. First 2 points. One, really good point, good question. What I do is protect the company. I don't build the products. So I'll test them. I use many of them, and I ensure that they work at scale and they have the right features and functions that you'd want to have. But at the end of the day, the decision to put in a feature or a component in the product is not my decision. I just have a voice like you do as a customer. So think of me as a customer. I'm just like a Coca-Cola CISO as an example. Jim, by the way, if he's here. To your question, we have a couple of frameworks that we use. From the board perspective, I do apply to, adhere to, and report on the NIST cybersecurity framework. And so that's what we use from a board perspective. And then obviously we use ISO and all the other internal things you'd expect from a control effectiveness. But so we think of controls, and then we think of capability. And so the NIST cybersecurity framework is the framework that we adhere to. Yeah. And we do it across 29 critical services as opposed to just one score for the whole company. It comes up to an aggregate score, but I think that's one of the fallacies is people forget it's different for a different service. The consumer service has a different risk profile than working for the government or, for example, the recent JEDI contract. And so you'd expect a different set of controls in both of those spaces. Does that make sense? Really good question. Another question. Yeah?
The balance between IT and cybersecurity. Who leads and who follows? Where do things originate? Who's the master? Who's the servant?
So the question was the balance between security and IT controls and basically who's in charge. if I paraphrase that correctly. Now, just I only have one more, but I'm doing this now that I'm on the Seahawks path. I want to see how good I am at this. Yeah. If you happen to watch the Seahawks game on Sunday, had I been there punting, we would have never gone into overtime, as you can clearly see with my accuracy. Wow, I'm really taking shots at Pete today. So it's interesting. As an evolution of the role, it's probably a good segue into this piece. When I first took the role, the security reported to the infrastructure manager in the IT department. And then it became a peer directly to the CIO, and then it became a peer to the CIO. And we separated it out. We separated security from IT directly. Close, because you want to be close to the controls, but different chains. That changed a little bit of the conversation as we went down that path, which is the reality is when you say, I think you said servant and master, is that correct? I think the view of it was probably a better way to think about it is who's in charge. At the end of the day, the end user's in charge. So the user experience is the thing we're driving to. And we'll have debates. We set policy, and we run and operate a lot of the functions that happen in that space. But at the end of the day, we have to drive business enablement. And so I can't just put in a bunch of security controls that completely bring the business to its knees, and neither can IT. Usually the conversation we'll end up having, and I'll talk in a minute about it, which is the way that I prioritize the work is no different than the way we prioritize building line of business applications. I have a backlog, I have a set of resources, and I have a set of asks of the IT department to go do. And then we have a pretty clean conversation on, I get it, but I have a backlog too, and then we just go through the backlog and have a debate. For you to do this, it's going to take this has to move or this has to change. Same for me. So for example, I want you to add new security capabilities on the cloud service. There's really only 3 options that happen with the IT department. One, it's native to the cloud fabric, and it just works, and they go turn it on. It's not, and we co-develop a third-party solution or a first-party custom solution that I would build. Or they can decide they can risk accept it, because at the end of the day, you can always risk accept, right? The key is who gets to make the risk acceptance decision. And it's not the IT department, and it's not the security department. That's probably the biggest thing that's changed in 10 years. Like, we wanted to run some machine learning against our sales tools, but I needed to respect a certain amount of privacy and security controls. They weren't ready. They weren't ready, so we had this big debate. Actually, the Seahawks factor into this story, too. It's kind of weird for the person who doesn't really know much about football. They wanted to move forward because it was a great way to improve their capability to do forecasting. But you had to respect the controls. I said, it's not that part that I want isn't quite ready, but you can risk accept it, but it has to be risk accepted by the CFO. And then the team immediately backed down and said, no, we're not ready. I said, no, you really do have to have the CFO risk accept this. But you can go to the comptroller first, which is another officer in the company. And I said, I would really strongly encourage you to do that in the next 72 hours. Because you can't move forward until I do have the ability to veto. But I said, but it isn't my decision. My decision is to tell you what the risk is. The business owner has to decide what risk they want to go take. And they said, well, we don't know if we want to do that. I go, well, you have 72 hours to go do this conversation with the comptroller. And they're like, I don't understand why you're putting us under such pressure. And I said, it's really simple. I'm going to the Seahawks game with the comptroller on Sunday. And he's going to ask me where we are, and I'm not going to lie to him. I'm going to tell him this is my view. So I want to give you the ability to go have that conversation. The greatest thing that happened was I went to the CFO, and she said, no. Until we can do it the same way we tell customers they're going to go do it, we're not going to go do that. So we will not. We'll just continue on the path and put pressure in the system to make those controls available in the fabric to make that happen. So it's a good example of that. And we can throw out questions at any time, honestly. It's, oh my goodness. There's not shirts for everybody, though. I'll go there, and then I'll talk about this. Go ahead, and then I'll go back to you. Yeah?
Microsoft's cybersecurity recovery plan. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, you mean internally how I think about it?
Right, and businesses that differentiate disaster recovery with cybersecurity recovery.
Yeah, the question is, how do I think about cybersecurity recovery? That's again, I think you're pandering, because I'm responsible for both. I'm responsible for all recovery, business continuity, disaster recovery for the company. And we merge cybersecurity. It's the same thing, but I'll talk about it. I'm happy to talk about that. Yep. And there's one back here.
It might be off topic, so you can tell me to take it offline. But
Perfect.
I am one of those dreaded developers, but I really would rather be in security. What advice would you give to someone like me who's trying to get in?
You're a dreaded developer?
Yeah, I'm one of those dreaded developers.
Oh no, I love developers. So it's a really good. Actually, we love developers in security because we build lots of things and we run everything through a security perspective. And we're a DevOps shop, so everything we do is basically dev to PM. And I have some, but very few people in my org that are not engineers. And so I can absolutely give you some advice. I can also take your card. I'm hiring 100 people this year alone, so I'd love to talk to you. So let me spend a minute on this, then I'll come back to the component about the business continuity. I'll work it into the story. When I originally took the role, it was much about technical architecture. A lot of security people are just in that mode of deep technology, deep architecture. Whether it's implementation or controls or whether it's dev, it's very different. But that was really the beginning of the role, a back office role. And I think about this similar to how I think about the role evolving for the CIO and the CFO. There's a Norman Rockwell picture of an accountant with a visor upside down that you could kind of see through sitting at their desk in the 50s. It's a beautiful picture. That's not what a CFO is today. They're not an accountant. They're a business leader. Our CFO, who made that awesome decision, I don't think of her as an accounting person at all. Trust me, she's very good at the numbers. But she drives amazing thought on how we drive and run the business. CIO was the same thing. At one point, the CIO was very much a back office tech person, geek, if you will. And today, again, in digital transformation, they're a large part of the transformation of a company, making everything become digital or digitally transformed. And again, so they become a business leader. I think the CISO has gone through the same thing in 10 years. Many organizations, the CISO, like I said, is either a peer to the CIO or is directly reporting to the CEO. The reporting structure is not important. It's what do you look for them for? Do you look to them to help you with technical architecture? Do you look to them to help you with cultural changes in the company? Do you look at them to help enable the business and make business decisions? And so that role has evolved a lot, not just at Microsoft, but all up. There's a framework Russell Reynolds runs on this, on what the evolving CISO is and the 4 stages of it. If you're interested, you should take a look at the Russell Reynolds report on the development and growth of a CISO. Whether you want to be one, whether you're hiring one, or whether you want to understand one, it's actually a pretty good model to go look at. And so my job, when I came in, right away was to build a risk management platform. That risk management platform, which eventually goes to our board, has to be the same thing as every other risk piece we do. So you can measure a cyber risk the same way you measure fraud risk, the same way you measure employment risk, the same way you measure business risk. And so risk management is a big part of the role. And I have an entire function that's dedicated to nothing but doing risk management. And I'll talk about that in a second. Also, understanding business enablement is key. I have a bunch of people on my team who are lovely security purists. There's people who are paranoid. There are people who are tri-annoyed. They're the most annoyed people ever. And they're great people. They're awesome. But they do have to understand we need to run a business. There are people who will say, hey, this should be the most important topic for the board of directors. I don't understand how anything's more important. If you're doing a $26 billion acquisition, I can tell you that's probably more important. And so you have to have a little bit of humility or lack hubris to do that well. And then to the comment about the IT, it is an operational role. And understanding how to do operational excellence is really an important part of it for a couple of reasons. One and foremost is I shouldn't say that. One bank claims they have no security budget. But I believe most people operate with, does anyone here not have a budget? Not $0. I mean, there is no budget. Yeah. The developer has no budget? We should. She worked for the government. They have no budget. We should talk about that. Can you turn this off for a second? So when you operate within a budget and you want to do new work, the best way to do it is always to self-fund. And the way you self-fund is you get efficiencies out of your system so that you can use those resources to go do other work. And so and it sometimes frustrates my team. There are also times when we do need to ask for net new net new resources and funding for new projects or new threats. But the idea is to do it in a super efficient way. Many times things in security start in security but should never live there. So as an example, most security organizations don't do patching today. 15 years ago, they did do patching. Today, they should just tell you what to patch and how much time you need to patch, but then the IT department should go push it. And this is where we have that wonderful conversation, which is, hey, it's year-end close. We may risk accept this small group and put a different set of monitoring capabilities so we don't have potential disruption to the business. But that said, in my space, you'll see in a minute, we're moving to a very virtualized set of capabilities. I will run the virtualization that's myself. My own team will operate that for the company, with a full plan that in 3 years, once we have it completely operationalized, I will hand it back over to the end user collaboration team, and they'll go run that instead. And so we have that going into the whole discussion. When we implemented a risk management platform, I ran the risk management platform. And then again, I gave it over to the operations team. You run the platform, I'll just be the customer. But for some things, there's subject matter expertise you need to accelerate the adoption of a new technology or a new approach. And so we do that. And so that's really the 4 functions of a CISO. The idea about simplifying and clarifying, and by the way, I look at how much time I spend in each of these areas, and they're all really dependent on how far along or where we are in the business cycle. If we're releasing new product or doing new internal tools, I may do more risk and more business enablement. If we're mature in something, then I'm probably more on operational efficiency. As an example, in our SOC, my goal is to eliminate tier 1 SOC analysts through data automation. And so that's a bear where you're just getting to super good operational efficiency. Before anyone freaks out about that, that doesn't mean that people are losing their jobs. It actually means that people are getting to do tier 2, tier 3 SOC work, which is far more interesting than just managing a queue of phishing things that come in. And so you automate the mundane part and you let people do the more exciting work, which is the hunting work or the other work that happens in that scenario. That's an example of thinking about being operationally efficient. Simplify and clarify is an interesting one. Security is a complex topic, whether you're talking about operations, whether you're talking about development, or whether you're talking about configuration management or other things. It's super easy to get caught up in the complexity of it. Thank you. Sorry. Hot. Hot. Should have noticed that by the little warmer thing here. Thank you. Woo. So what we did is we challenged ourselves. This is the classic, I would have written a shorter memo if I had more time. It turns out that's really true in this space. And I can make security super complex. We run literally hundreds of services, right? We're taking in 6.5 billion events every day. So yes, it has scale and it's complex. My highly intelligent, super smart, wonderful wife who has terrible taste in men gave me some really good advice, which was, do you want 100% of the people? Is it better to have 10% of the people understand 100% of your job or 100% of the people understand 10% of your job? She was right. It's better to have 100% of the people understand the most critical 10% things are the things we have to go get done. Because again, my job is to have other people want to care about security, not just the security people. I want every dev to be able to write a piece of software that's secure without having to become a security expert. And so how do we go do that? And so in this scenario, we just simplified, and it took a long time. It's embarrassing how long it took to get this simplified view. We have information protection is our goal. And there's really only 3 things when you boil it down to. As long as we have strong identity in the system, in the whole ecosystem, and as long as we know the device you're connecting from is healthy. So in the past, we used to say is managed, but is managed is not enough. It has to be healthy, and it has to be certifiably healthy at the time you try to connect to any asset. And thirdly, you have to have data and telemetry pervasively throughout the entire system. Why? Why is this important? Because we used to work on this model where we believed the perimeter was interesting, and we believed it was a good control plane. That's no longer the case. Identity is the new perimeter. It is the newest and most important control plane we have. In a client-to-cloud world, where people literally don't come onto your corporate network to go talk to their cloud provider, you need a different way to manage this. And so this was, okay, we got to get the data and telemetry from the cloud provider, from the device, from the identity system. So that's it. It's those 3 things. If I can get people to remember that, that's awesome. People inside will argue with me. Why do I have to have a managed device? I already 2-factor auth into the system. Because if I own your device, I'm now you. People argue the other way. I don't want to do 2-factor auth, but I have this really healthy device. Again, hackers don't break in, they log in. So no, that's not going to work either. You have to do all 3, and I need the telemetry. The important thing on the telemetry, and this is why as the role has evolved over 10 years, Probably some of the smarter, I made a lot of bad decisions, made a few decent decisions. One was 7 or 8 years ago, we invested heavily in data and built an amazing set of collection systems that would let us get very rich data that we use. And so we heavily invested in data science. And in fact, my data team and my engineering and dev team are working under the same leader because I want them that close together in what they do. Sorry. And so that telemetry does 3 things, though. Most people think from a security practitioner's perspective, why I want data is for anomaly detection, like someone logging in from 2 places at the same time, or name whatever anomaly you think is interesting. And I do, but that's only one of 3 things. Go back to the beginning of this conversation. The second thing is, and the question the gentleman brought up about business continuity and disaster recovery. I can build amazingly secure systems, but if they're not available, it doesn't really matter. And so you use the telemetry to ensure the service health of all the services you're running, whether they're security, collaboration, or other services. I need to know that they're consistent, and they're not just DR capable, disaster recovery capable, that they're actually resilient the whole time, that there is no such thing as DR, that it is resilient and that it's uptime and live, and we run that part. The other thing, so you have anomaly detection and service health. But I'll give an example. The other most important thing is if you put users first and you want to understand user experience, every time we make a change, we can understand what the user experience impact is. And so that's the 3 reasons for doing the data and telemetry, and I'll give you an inside example of how we do that. Then lastly, this whole thing is built on a platform which is a risk management platform, which is basically how I prioritize the work. I have a very long list of things I have to go do, which one takes priority. And so the risk management system is purely a way of looking at likelihood and probability of something happening and control effectiveness, and then I prioritize my work. It's really not that complicated. And then the assurance component is really how do we not only prioritize the work, but make sure the quality of the work we're doing is good. And so if you think about a penetration team, a red team, attack and pen team, they fall under assurance. Their job is to actually double check and make sure the systems we build are safe. And when they find things, we don't rebuke people for it. We reward them for it, and we ask them to go make the changes that have to be done. That's an assurance function. Software development lifecycle is an assurance function to make sure people are doing the right things, not having cross-site scripting and other things in there. In all cases, you want to automate as much of that as you can. The nice part about this, though, putting my very high-end 3-dimensional animation and graphics background from college and math to work, was to make it land for executives, we added this, which has a really cool sound effect, but I didn't play that today. But it makes the point, you have to have all 3 of those. If you don't, it doesn't matter. All the information falls on the floor or walks out the door. So we have to do all 3 of those things. So getting people to understand that was good. Turning that into the strategy, these 6 items that I can talk to my teams who sit here, or some of them are sitting up front, my boss, my boss's boss, or our board, we don't just make it that simple word, we actually map it to the full strategy. So those 6 items show up, and the way we think about it is we have a set of services. These services are like the automobile industry. They are just factory services we run all the time. On top of that, back to the person who's a developer, we're a DevOps shop. So I run epics. Epics run 18 to 24 months. Epics can be reducing technical debt because there's a new threat or something we just didn't do. Epics could be new capability we want to go build. And so as an example, Zero Trust is an epic. And I'll have special people that are epic PMs. Actually, that's kind of cool. You're an epic PM. I should get a shirt like that. As an epic PM, they rotate, though. They don't stay with the project. Once it becomes a service, then they take on the next epic. And so the idea is that their specialty is being a PM who does epic design, not a PM that's a subject matter expert on Zero Trust. So those things are 18 to 24 months. They have an exit criteria, and only 3 things happen with these. They either, like the automobile industry, become a new service line. For example, Prius for Toyota is a different line of vehicle. Or they integrate that solution into other service lines, like having a hybrid Highlander or having a hybrid Camry or whatever other vehicle. And I use Toyota as an example just because I happen to like the company. Or the third option is you kill it. But it's super important that you have very clear criteria so you stop doing things that aren't adding value. And I've killed a number of things. And when we kill those things, what do we learn from it? And again, don't rebuke people for taking the risk to try something. It didn't work. And we learn from it. And so that's really the simplified view. The thing that was interesting, so for every one of these services that you see here, in each of these categories, I do service health reviews every month. We go through 2 days, now it's a full day, it was 2 half days, now it's 1 full day, of every single thing that we have in this space. And then I review, now remember, this isn't an org statement. Some people say, oh, it's org. No, getting my people to understand this isn't an org thing, this is a strategy. It's not an org thing. And we look at these functions across it, but I know exactly what we spend in terms of FTE, vendor, hardware, CapEx, OpEx, and we have very clear mapping and planning. And so when I want to do something, like I want to add in Zero Trust, either something has to get operationally efficient to give me headroom, I go ask for more money, or I change what we're doing in the model. But it's super discrete. It's very easy for me to tell which lever to push and which one to go move. I'll give you 2 good examples of this. One, for years, as I said, we knew identity was the new perimeter. So for us, identity was also the #1 risk I report for information risk protection for the company. That ran for years. Partially because we continue to see more attacks on identity, more types of attacks on identity. So things like password spray is a super effective, hard to stop thing. And so I'll talk about that in a minute. We've made a lot of improvements in how we do identity management and things like removing passwords, users using bio for all their entries and everything else. So that's reduced in control effectiveness. Even though attack rates are going up, our control effectiveness is also going up, so it's dropped in terms of risk. Newest risk, the biggest risk for us now is supply chain because of the visibility of things we don't have, things like from open source community, potentially, or third-party hardware, third-party software, vendors in your environment. And so how do you manage that? And it's just another risk we'll go manage. Sometimes it's not technology-based. A good example is, how many of you have vendors in your environment? They're not bad. It's not a bad thing to have vendors in your environment, but how do you control the devices they're coming in on the model I had before? Guess what? I'm changing my model. I contractually tell them they have to do things, but they don't have, and we try to hold them accountable to those things, but for some it doesn't work. If you're a big company and you're a person on contract for 5 different companies, all 5 of us can't manage that same device, only one can. Good, I'm moving you all off of devices altogether, you're all gonna be virtualized. And so we're in the process of redoing that so everything's virtualized. Why? Because now I manage the virtual image and so I take management over. They actually like it because they don't like managing the devices either. And so I get much better visibility, much better telemetry, and we're in the process of rolling that out now. So that was an example of how the risk changes for supplier. Same thing with IoT. IoT was not even the top 15. We've seen more and more recent attacks that are super effective at using IoT and then pivoting from IoT to something else more important than the IoT component. We've seen these happening a lot, writ large. IoT's moved up into the top 10. Again, I'll realign resources, I'll look at things differently, and I'll walk through an example of that in just a second. Does that make sense? What I didn't know was, while this is super helpful internally, how helpful this was gonna be with my vendors, which was, and I use suppliers and vendors as well, I just pulled this sheet out. I literally have a laminated copy of it. And I'm like, awesome. You have 4 minutes to tell me how you're going to make me more effective or more efficient in any one of these things I'm doing. Go. Just go walk around RSA. It's awesome. I'm not trying to be hard. I'm like, but really, you need to simplify and tell me what you're going to do. So that was super important. And then they'll obviously say, well, you're just not thinking about this right-mindedly, Bret. You're missing a whole space. Awesome. Maybe I am. I'll give you an extra minute. Go. You have 5. Tell me what I'm missing. And we've worked with a bunch of people, and we do suppliers, and it's super helpful. So it's turned out it's a good internal tool. It's a good external tool. I would ask you, how many of you have a single pager like this for your strategy? Great. I want to talk to you after. I want to learn from it and see what I can make better. How many of you want one of these? Awesome. How many of you are the head of the security group that have to create this? How many of you work with security groups that you wish had this? Okay, so we'll make sure you get a copy. You can bring it back, and you can help them go build that, and it'll make your life better too, especially your IT department. So with that, let me talk about leading with vision, because that's the simplification and clarity on the strategy. Again, network perimeter. So we have smart cards. There's room on this for 2 antennas and the smart chip. Or you can get rid of the smart chip and have 3 antennas. The 2 antennas on this, my red team knows how to take advantage of that. And so we need to get to a new model. I can't go with a new antenna and a new model that's both backwards compatible with the doors and lets me log in and keep the smart chip. Plus the smart chip is $5 and the other one's $1. I want to get rid of that. My users hate this, right? We, like everyone else, the network is the key and we're going to VPN, but if you're not on the network, you're riskier profile, true, and we're going to make you VPN in. Who loves their VPN experience? Yeah. You love your VPN experience. Whose do you have?
Cisco.
Oh, Cisco, that's a good one. I like Palo Alto's, we use Palo Alto. We still do VPN. I don't want VPN. I don't want to do it ever again. I want actually things to just be secured in the fact that I don't have to. I shouldn't assume the VPN is the right thing. Now, we still do VPN, but we're trying to get less and less VPN and more of this end-to-end security element that I talked about. So 18, 19 years ago, we implemented the two-factor auth with the smart chip, and people would forget their badge, or they didn't have the device reader, or they'd leave their badge in the device reader, and we can go through all those issues. And so while it was effective, it wasn't very good for the user experience. Now, in a typical software mentality, we said, hey, we can get rid of this by creating, because you have this trusted module, right? It's know something, have something. And we did all this work to get TPMs put into PCs, which is, again, a trusted piece of hardware. And we can do a certificate, bind it to that, and you don't need this anymore. It's always there on your device. It's an awesome idea. And we created this thing called the virtual smart card. Guy who works for me created it, actually, when he was in the Windows team. It was a brilliant idea. It was a lesson learned in the difference between being right and getting it right. He was right. This is a bad experience. He was also right that we should have two-factor everywhere. And that was, whoops, I'll get there in a second. This is the zero trust story, that we should have two-factor everywhere. What he wasn't right is how to go do it. Getting it implemented was one thing, but if you don't have a way of managing the certificates, if you don't have a way of managing the whole experience, it just doesn't work. So let me walk you through this vision-led component of zero trust and the pieces that are part of that. So when people talk about zero trust, which is an amazing buzzword in the industry these days, I'm merely showing you my view. I have a meeting with the Gartner analysts this afternoon. They're going to remind me that information protection is in their view of it and it's not in mine. That's fine. They have every right to have that conversation in view. It's not that I don't think information protection and DLP is not important. I'm, again, simplifying. It's these simple three things that I just talked about. The idea that you have a device, that you have this model that actually works, devices, identity, access, and services, least privilege access, and really a very simplified view, going back to the VPN. Get users off the corporate network altogether. Don't have a corporate network. The only thing on the corporate network is my most critical assets. And so when you come into the environment, we're in the process now, many of the buildings are already there. When you come into the building and you connect, you actually connect straight out to the internet. IT guys actually like it because it drives down their cost. And you look at a network stack from Cisco or anyone else, the cost of the stack is usually 1/4 of the cost of the network protection layers you put on top of it. And so they actually like it because it reduces their cost. User experiences tend to be better because you're local to whatever you're going to go connect to. And so when you have distributed SaaS providers, you actually get faster and lower latency response in that environment. But that means a change because, again, you're not doing VPN. You have to have this very clean device, this very strong identity, and then all the data to verify it, the things that you're doing. And so this telemetry becomes critical in that model. So get people off the corporate network, expand, and go to internet first. It reduces the attack surface. And it really, using a bunch of data and AI, which, again, I didn't know this is what we were going to use it for when we were first building it, gives me the ability to do amazing detections, anomaly, and shape the user experience. Meaning, let me walk you through what that experience looks like. So to make it fairly straightforward, I have employees and partners that are users in the system. These people get internet connectivity, whether they're here on the Wi-Fi, which has been a little sketchy yesterday. I don't know if it's better today. They could be at a local coffee shop, or they could be on my corporate network, but that's where they are, and they want to go connect to a service. But I make a bunch of questions and attestations or conditional access statements about what the user is. Okay, you came to me and you came as a two-factor auth. Fantastic. Your device is healthy and up to date and current. Fantastic. And now I'm going to let you connect in one of three experiences. So I have a differentiated experience based on what you come to me as. You can be a rich experience with everything running local on the device, office and storage and everything else, or I may say instead, you know what, you're only getting a web experience, there'll be no local data. And you can do that. Or the third option, which is we'll virtualize it. In the virtualized model, again, now I own the virtualization backend, so I actually can look at the health attestation, plus I get all the telemetry that goes on there. It's a very different view from us than 10 years ago. We didn't think in this way. We thought everything was a rich user experience because we came from a device Windows-based model. And so now we realize that there's 3 models we'll give for our users, and virtualization will be a huge part of that. And so that's actually pretty exciting. And then we'll actually let you connect to whatever service it is that you want to go do in this space. It could be one of my own cloud services like Microsoft 365 or Azure. It could be third-party applications. We use those as well, like Marketo and Concur. And they also will get the same set of experiences in the same way of the questioning that happens going through our CASB broker. Or we still run lots of line of business applications. Same thing, you want to connect to the HR web or the expense system or whatever other system you have to. And so the idea is regardless of the type of system you're going to, you get this same set of experiences that work throughout the whole system. Does that make sense? It's hard. It's like, I say this, dieting is easy conceptually. Doing it is hard. And so the idea is it's not hard conceptually. You have to be patient and you have to accept that progress over perfection is the key here. And so when we think about it, that's what's super important. So for us, the first thing that we targeted was the identity piece, right? And as I said, we started with multi-factor auth. We said multi-factor auth everywhere. I literally could see people cringing down the hall when you'd come walking up to them. Oh no, here comes Bret and his team. They're going to talk to me about 2FA. Oh, like, you don't know what a work sponge is? No? One of my wife's favorite friends, we call him the fun sponge. He's no fun at all. He takes all the fun out of everything we do. Work sponge is one of those people that you see and you're walking along and you know that when you go talk to them, they're going to take like 10 minutes out of your day on something that's not going to help you. And so you'll see them come down the hall and you kind of go like this, around that way. That was me. Like they'd see the multi-factor guy coming, oh, he's going to pound on us again about 2FA and multi-factor auth and know something, have something. And so we changed it, and we said, let's just eliminate passwords. So we go from this ugly mechanized place to this beautiful nirvana space, which is being very much, and it sounds like it's just words, but it's not. Getting us to this point where we said, hey, yes, I want multi-factor everywhere, but what if I did instead of know something, have something, I just do this, you are something. And we use biometrics to be the way you log into the system when you first come in. And we do that with Windows Hello, which is bound by all the hardware, but instead of this virtual smart card that was all clunky and terrible, you walk up and the machine sees you. It's faster logon, it's much better, user doesn't have it. If you don't have a camera that can do this, because it's not a regular camera, it does infrared, right? Then you can use fingerprint, which is very, very readily available. You can do PIN. And the reason why PIN's okay is that PIN is only for that device. It doesn't do anything else, so you can't use it anywhere else. I think people get confused by that. Our users did. In fact, so much when you think about the users, we would enroll it, they would enroll in their biometrics, and then the data was showing us everyone kept entering their passwords. Like, what's going on? And so we went and worked with the Windows team and said, once people have enrolled, stop showing them their password and just let them do this. And so being vision-led changed the way we think about writing Windows Hello for Business. Now remember, I don't run just Microsoft. A lot of people are like, oh, it's really easy. You run all this Windows 10. No, I don't. I have 130,000 iOS and Android devices alone. I'm the 5th largest Mac shop in the world. I have Linux running everywhere. And so for people who don't have Hello enabled, I can walk you through this scenario. This is the process we went through. Progress over perfection. So number one, actually develop and deploy the solution that will actually work, which Windows Hello for Business is one of those, but we also have Microsoft Authenticator on the phone, so you can do bio approval on your phone to your Mac when you log into your Mac to come to work for people who are working or developing the Mac products. And so that's awesome. Then reduce user visible passwords. So when we say eliminate passwords, that's the vision. The reality is they're still passwords, but the user shouldn't know about them. Because back-end infrastructure for moving passwords is going to take a really long time. But if my users don't have to know passwords, that's a good thing. And we had to admit, that's a great thing from a user experience. We'll work on the underlying pieces here. But in order to eliminate passwords, again, user experience. I walk up to my machine, it just works. It's fantastic, right? Number two, so I'm getting stronger authentication because if you don't come to me from something that's been with 2FA, then you don't work. So you still can't get access to things. So it's still a much more secure system. And then long term, of course, I want to eliminate it altogether from the directory, that there should just be a key in the directory and no password and all cert-based. We will get there. It will not happen in 4 years. We're 3 years into this journey. And so today, 90% of my users don't enter a password when they come in. But it wasn't just the UX and the devices. And you'll notice we use the phone authenticator for the non-Windows platforms. So you have two ways you can go do this. But everything we did, we gave to the FIDO Alliance. In fact, one of my people was the president of FIDO for years, which is to encourage and get industry support. And I believe most people have announced support for FIDO 2. And I believe Apple either has or will soon support that as well. So I'll be able to have the same great experience on an Apple in an enterprise environment, which will be fantastic. In the meantime, though, you can still use the authenticator. So that is a journey. That's the vision-led. That helped us immensely. And that change in that about user experience was critical. But notice I kept having intelligence throughout the whole system. Right? Now, to bring it back to my Seahawks, I haven't talked about for a while, you have to do things. Most importantly, change the way we think about the problem. This idea that entropy and password rotation is a good thing, again, is the wrong approach to how to solve security. And so while people think it's a good idea, all the math will show you it's wrong. Creating 16-character complex passwords creates a horrid user experience and, in fact, makes it easier because of the way people will treat their passwords for people to take advantage of that. So we had to change that model. But in order to change that model, you have to go to easily guessable passwords. That's actually more important than complex passwords. So here's a password for you. What year did the Seahawks win the Super Bowl? They had won one Super Bowl. What year was it? 14 or 15? You should know this. You're a Seahawks fan. Someone should Bing it. When we were going through our own internal stuff, capital S Seahawks 2017 was the one we were talking about, was a very popular password. But it mapped everything, uppercase, lowercase, numbers. It's easily guessable. We do 670 billion authentications a month around the world. Hey, there's some pretty cool data we have here. Let's go figure out what the most common passwords are and use that data and eliminate that through the filter so that you can't use those common passwords. But guess what? As popular as I like to think the Seahawks are, that password would never hit that radar. So we built a system that uses our massive intelligence across the globe with our internal, what are you doing? Thank you. He was checking for me, 2014. He works for me, by the way. I wouldn't say that to anybody else. Technically, he works for me. I feel like I work for him. Eliminate it through the common ones, but then give me a list of my own that I can append to that. Because in Boston, it might not be Seahawks 2017 as their favorite password, or it may be seasonally based, or it may be something about your company or whatever it might be, but there's a common set of passwords. So you've got to get those out of the system. The second thing you have to do is you have to build using telemetry to understand how you're doing password spray detection. And once you can eliminate easily guessable passwords, and once you can eliminate or at least mitigate and have great view into password spray detection using this telemetry, the next thing I get to do, because people don't enter passwords, is I stop changing passwords. My users love it. They don't change their password. They don't really even know there's a password anymore that's there, and I'll be able to change it up for underneath and we don't have a problem. But it's a safer, more secure system. That is a super important thing, but it takes a lot of things in the background to make those things happen. And so, and those are, everything we do gets put into Active Directory and everything else. That being said, people still have issues, people still get fished. So we do password reset, but the IT department that we were talking about, that used to do 10,000 password resets a month, now does less than 1,000. My goal is to be under 200, right? And so we'll continue on that path. So that was the password spray stuff. I gotta look at time. This has put people first. I'm gonna walk you through another example about how to use data for what we call digital empathy, which is super important. But that gentleman had a question over there in the glasses.
No passwords bought in. Wonderful.
What's that? Oh, you bought in. Yep, got it.
Passwords, wonderful idea.
Yep.
Auditors and requests for proposals that now have an IT section saying, are you following everything?
Yep.
60, 90 days.
Yep.
How does that culture get?
It's awesome. And it's a fantastic question. It's getting old. Ready? Let's see if I can make this work. Oh, he comes up short. Sorry, I should have put it over your back shoulder as you're running. Yeah, the auditor question is a great question, which is I believe in it, but I have these like PCI requirements that have a 90-day rotation policy and everything else. Two things. We have a different group that works with regulators to work on regulations, but I recognize that's a long-term fix. You have to go work with your auditors to show them, because in any of those things, if you have compensating controls, then you can get the approval to go do that. And so for my example, we explained and spent time educating the auditors that this set of controls is actually far more effective than the thing that you're doing, and then it becomes a compensating control and you get an exception for it. And then eventually you change the regulation as long as you're meeting those things. And that's exactly how we did it. And then we published papers on this. There's a great paper, I can find the link to it, that'll explain why this password myth doesn't actually work. But again, you have to do these other compensating controls. You can't just suddenly say, I'm not going to do that, right? Totally get that. So I think that's important. Yeah? What's that? Oh, I love service accounts. Start with the thing that's the biggest problem. You have less service accounts than you do user accounts. Service accounts today, for those who aren't familiar, they can be, first, turn off no interactive login for service accounts, eliminate people using service accounts who shouldn't, and then get them to use service principals instead of accounts, and then you turn on this MSA rotation, and that one will have to go solve a different way. And that's another phase we're actually working on. I'll have a paper in about 6 months that'll talk about that. And then the next question then, and this is the beauty of this job, is okay, now you've fixed service accounts, what about token binding, right? And so, yeah, that's great, but if you still have users logging in with passwords, you don't need to worry about the other two, because you have to put a water bar on that mark. Yep, so it's a good question. Digital empathy, this is this idea about the users, that we make it easy to use, like the password thing I mentioned about. But also make sure the user understands the value of what we're doing. That's super important. So we also were very much a BYOD shop. I always get this wrong, and someone from the press will misquote me, so let me make sure I say it right. I still believe in BYOD, but I will manage that device. So if you want to pay for a device and bring it in, have at it, but I will manage that device. Or I'll let you work from that device, but only virtually when you connect to our system. And so, but that meant all of our phones became managed devices, which are personal devices. And so making sure people understood what the value of doing that was and why we do that, which we put anti-malware collection, particularly on Androids, that are making people much safer on their phones, et cetera, et cetera. Make sure they're very clear about the privacy principles. There are people who are yelling, oh my God, I don't want IT reading my mail. I don't want the security part reading my mail. One specific, I don't want Bret Arsenault reading my mail. If you know me, I don't read my own mail, so I'm sure as heck not going to read your mail. So that was it. And then the sentiment monitoring. When we rolled out the MDM stuff for our mobile devices, the team had rolled out about 50,000 devices. We had less than 140 help desk tickets. That seems like a really good metric. You shouldn't have to slow down for that. But the sentiment analysis that we do, which is across internal social media, including like Yammer and other things, there was a blip of some really loud noise from a specific group. They were very upset. We stopped. We heard the feedback, and it was actually very valid. Right? We go, well, let's understand, seek to understand what's going on. Why is nobody else having a problem? And we could have just said, which some of my team did, you're at 0.003%. Keep going. I said, no, let's see what's going on here. The privacy principles are really clear. I can't say we won't do something. Like they thought I could see swipe left, swipe right, everything you did. I can't. I'm not in administrative mode when I'm on the phone. I can't do that. But if I switch modes, I can. That's absolutely fair. If I have a subpoena, I have to honor that subpoena, and I can do that. So what I can do and what I will do are two different things. Being clear what would cause that was one thing we had to make more clear in the messages our users saw. The other thing we had to do was recognize that and say, hey, you know what? I can put a switch in the MDM, because we own this, the mobile device management platform, that if I switch into administrative mode, you know. They're like, no, you can't switch unless I let you. Nope, that's not how it's going to play. I will notify you, though, so you know. And you can do what you want to go do then, but I think that's a completely reasonable balance in trade to do that, so we've put that into the product backlog. We never would have heard that without the sentiment analysis. We would have been running on this help desk ticket as a problem. We use the sentiment analysis for everything we do. We also ask people to volunteer for the value statement. Hey, do you want to try virtualization? Because on your home PC, which I don't want to manage, because now you have multi-users, try virtualization. Here's the benefits it gives us. Let us know, give us feedback, and then we start rolling out by risk groups. And so having that sort of progress over perfection is super helpful, and having these listening systems we just never had before. 2014, Seahawks won. So that was really what we were doing there. And then lastly, I would just say, continue to advance and improve. So we worked on this password spray detection. We did this big thing. Then we did the how do I do local, easily guessable passwords. We built a bunch of technology and capabilities around insider threat because threats are not external. Again, using machine learning, large data repositories. We were nice. The product group said, wow, that's a really cool capability. I bet everyone in here would like to have that. I'm sure they would. I don't have time to build product. I used to build product before I was over here. So I not only gave them the technology, I gave them the lead developer for it, and then they went over, and I think they announced yesterday the availability of the insider threat management tools as part of the compliance suite. So painful for me, good for Microsoft, like to lose this person. That's awesome. And then long-term, good for Bret, because I don't need to engineer my own solution anymore. I can just use the product version instead. And so that's actually, again, have the long game in mind. And then as I mentioned, SOC automation. I just have to be much better at using data intelligence so people aren't doing these things. All the past, like self-service password reset, no, just automate all that stuff out of the system. Automate, flatten, and rebuild, automate all that stuff. So those are sort of the things that we learned. The view I guess I have on this is any job you take, somebody made decisions that were probably for a good reason at the time. So honor that. Don't hold people accountable for things like that. 2, at least my lesson, but I have to be honest about where we are, which is where the risk thing is. Like we have real risks. We have real threats. And how do I prioritize and go work on those and don't confuse myself. And then as I said yesterday, I have hope for the future. I do believe that encryption can be more effectively used by bad people than good people because they use it in a much smaller, non-scalable format. And so when people always say encryption's the answer, it's not, right? It's a great part of a defense in-depth solution. But in the new world, we're having the greatest amount of signal and the best analytics and AI technology or machine learning. And does anyone know the difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence and all these things? Really? Okay, so AI is a PowerPoint and machine learning is in code. That's the easiest way to think about it. And but having those capabilities becomes really important. And so the person with the richest, most diverse set of signals, it used to be network, that's not it. You want authentication signal, you want device signal, you want app usage signal, all in a way that respects privacy. And then with the ability to reason across, and more importantly, correlate across those, actually, I believe for the first time, the good guys have the advantage over the bad guys in this new world. So that, I say thank you. I'll stick around for some questions. I think I ran a few minutes long. I apologize. And have a wonderful day. Thank you.